along a bit so that other people can come in and sit down. Thank you.
There are seats, yeah.
Sit here. You cover just Nigeria or Sub-Saharan Africa in general?
The team that covers all the Sub-Saharan Africa.
Okay.
But one of our West Africa analysts is
Sorry? Oh, right, okay.
And yourself?
No, my work is not related to Nigeria at all, but Nigeria probably takes up at least half my time every day. Like it's basically online, writing, reading, that kind of stuff. Yeah. You go, do you have to go out there often?
As a team, yeah.
Okay.
It's a big topic.
Okay, where do you pick it up and where do you drop it? So, yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening and welcome to this Royal African Society event on how to fix Nigeria's economy. My name is Caitlin Pearson and I'm the events coordinator for the Royal African Society. Before I hand over to Femi Ayanda, who's the chair for this evening, I'd like to make a few housekeeping announcements. So in case of an emergency, the fire exit is over there. Please could you turn your phones on silent? And if you're on Twitter, we have a hashtag for this evening's event, which is How to Fix Nigeria, and we are at Roy AfriSoc. You can see the hashtag there. So please tweet about anything that might inspire you this evening. And if you know anyone who was unable to get a ticket, you can let them know that the event is live streamed. So if they go onto the Frontline Club's website, the link for the live stream will be there. And we're also collecting questions on Twitter from people watching the live stream. As some of you may know, the RAS is a membership organisation, and if you'd like to find out more about what we do and what to join, please do pick up a leaflet on your chair and stick around and talk to one of us after the event. We can tell you more about the membership. So thank you all so much for coming, and I hope you enjoyed the discussion. And yeah, please stick around afterwards to give us your feedback.
Right. Good evening, everybody, and welcome. It's really nice to see everyone turned up so nice and early. This is How to Fix Nigeria. 2 years ago, myself and a group of friends came together and we thought, we'll make a documentary about how to fix Nigeria. But then, as a writer said about Nigeria once, everything in Nigeria is going to kill you. We had subsidy riots in Nigeria, and we couldn't do what we wanted to do. So we came to the Royal African Society and said, how about we start having a conversation about how to fix Nigeria? And we'll take it from one topic to the other. As you can see, it's a long journey. It's been 2 years. We're on it. We've come to a point that we think at this point is crucial for Nigeria. In 2014, global oil prices fell by over 70%. For Nigeria, it seemed like the bottom had dropped out. And soon after, Nigeria elected a new president in a historic election, handing over from an incumbent to a challenger. And it became that this government became burdened with a huge debt burden, a country that was grappling with widening deficits that is threatening to reach like 15 billion by 2016. I think actually it's surpassed that now. And the government is looking to borrow maybe $9 billion for all sorts of things. Now, what we want to find out this evening is, what is Nigeria going to do about fixing the economy now? If Nigeria really, really, really wanted to become prosperous, what does she need to do now? And what would future generations have to do? So recently I was reading something written by one of the speakers who's here this evening. Usually Nigerians say this, they say only God can fix Nigeria. But well, I telephoned God and she said she was busy. And so I decided that I'd ask, well, get a war room on the economy together. This is stealing from the words of somebody who is right here on the panel. I'm going to introduce you to them. This evening, what we are attempting to do is break down the challenges with Nigeria's development and prosperity case to the barest minimum, so that the average person understands what the challenges really are, and if we wanted to do something about it, what really needs to be done. So I'm going to start the introductions of my panel from my immediate left-hand side, because of course, women matter first. And not because she's a woman, but because she's a really, really bright person. I've been trying to pronounce the name correctly. She's not an astronaut, but it's close to NASA, but it's NASA. NASA. NASA is, I'm going to start from here, sorry. So NASA Tesfaye, I've been trying to pronounce that also, Tesfaye, is director. Did I get it correctly?
Tesfaye, yes.
The professor got it correctly. Is director of Africa Analysis, Economics and Country Risk at IHS. She's responsible for data analysis and forecast on political violence and the political economy in sub-Saharan Africa, i.e., she tells you what's going to happen in sub-Saharan African countries before everybody else knows it. Thank you, welcome. Good to have you here.
Thank you for the very generous introduction.
And right beside her is Feifa Wemi. Feifa Wemi is a senior investment accountant at Canada Life. He likes to think that he's not an accountant, he's not an economics, but somebody who likes to tickle with economics, minus the graphs. He has a love-hate relationship with Nigeria by his own admission. And he likes to tinker and bother people that he considers to be oligarchs and monopolists in Nigeria. He's very well known on Twitter as Alhaji Putin Hunter. Good to have you, Mr. Fawemi.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
And last but not the least is Professor Charles Saludo. I cannot begin to explain to you, I cannot read his bio. Suffice to say, he's one of Nigeria's foremost brightest economic minds in Nigeria, former governor of the Central Bank of Nigeria, served on more than 25 standing or ad hoc technical and policy committees in Nigeria, outside of Nigeria, consulted, worked with World Bank, IMF, EU, UN agencies, so on and so forth. What you might is currently also advising a number of institutions around the world, traveling around the world, working with several think tanks. What is not on his CV is that he's Nigeria's most beloved political economist, rabble-rouser. Every time he writes anything, Nigeria reacts violently happy or violently angry. Hopefully tonight they will be violently hopeful. So I'm not going to waste a lot of time. I'm going to start by asking each person on the panel to start with a 4-minute intro. What we want to do is to lay a foundation. If you start today in front of Nigeria's Economic Committee, what would you say to them that needs to be done and done immediately? Now, if you sat and you were going to talk to Nigeria's president in 10 years or 15 years' time, what would you say to that, to he or her about fixing Nigeria's economy? I'm going to start with you, Fee.
There's a story I like. It's from 1970 in Ireland. So basically, there was a time when the Irish had there was a milk glut. So there was too much milk in the country. They couldn't sell it. Prices were terrible, and people began to tinker with milk and say, okay, what else can we do with this milk? Aside from just selling it. And it was out of that crisis that you got your Irish Bailey's cream that you have today. In the process of mixing milk with, I think it was whiskey or something, somebody figured out that, okay, this actually works, and you have your Bailey's cream today. And, so when oil prices crashed in Nigeria, I thought, in my head, I'm thinking, okay, it's possible that, something good will come out of this. But then, in the last 1 year, what's actually happened is a combination of a nervous breakdown, throwing a tantrum, and just generally feeling sorry for ourselves. And, I'm not convinced, I'm not sure that the way the Nigerian government is set up, it can function with oil at less than $40 a barrel. It was unfortunate, but it's just the reality that I'm not sure that, the government can think its way out of, this problem. So I think, to be honest, where I am now is I'm just praying for oil prices to go up to, I don't know, $50, $60. If we can get there, then possibly, maybe, they can maybe relax and think properly. But then, I think the main thing I'll tell them that is the fundamental problem that Nigeria is facing right now is a loss of dollar income. All the money we earned was coming from oil. If you lose your job, you're not going to sit at home and say, okay, I'm going to start eating anything growing from the backyard, or I'm just going to double down and say, I'm not going out or anything. You look for another job. So fundamentally, it's not easy. Fundamentally, the Nigerian economy needs to, it's like turning an oil tanker. It's going to take you probably hours or days even. But that's what needs to be done in Nigeria. An over-reliance on oil, but then can it be beyond the capacity of 170 million people to fight their way out of a problem, a crisis like this? If you say it cannot happen, if you throw your hands up and say, we can't do it, then you're saying something really serious about yourself. So I think my main thing to them will be, look, we've lost dollar income from one place. We need to get dollar income from another place, and I'm big on exports. That's the message I've been shouting as to whoever will listen. I'm big on export. It's oil that is the problem, but there are other things you can do. You can sell other things. You can go out there. You can look to the seas and, fundamentally restructure it. Because one thing I say is, any policy right now that the government is doing, subject it to the $60 oil test. People are making noise over different things now. If oil goes back to $60, would they still be saying this thing? Because a lot of things are sort of like knee-jerk reaction, panic. Everybody shouting, buy Nigeria to grow the Naira and all that. Fine. If oil goes to $70, will anybody still be saying that? We'll go back to our old ways. But you need to do something that will be sustainable, something that fundamentally changes the way we are.
Okay. I'm going to come back to some of the things you've said. I'm very good. They call me the witch because I'm very good at sensing and feeling how people are feeling. I can feel your frustration. And you said over and over again, that they've lost their job. Nigeria must realize she's lost her job. She's lost the oil. She's lost her penny. Okay, we'll come back. She can't spend a pound if she's lost her penny. And I can feel Professor Saludo moving everything because he wants to go. I'm coming to you. But then, Nasat, if you start with President Buhari today, what would you say to him? Considering he said recently that he will not devalue the Naira because he's worried about inflation and the common man in Nigeria. Nigeria will buy Nigeria to raise the Naira, and that's one of the central strategies to get the economy back going. Well, there's a lot of talk about job creation, agriculture, so on and so forth. If you start with him today, what would you say to him about some of those ideas? What would you say to him he should be doing, really?
I'd like to see more details as to how he thinks he can accomplish it within the budget that has been passed around between the Senate or the legislature and the executive.
Which budget?
Well, the one where we've seen highlights,
Okay.
but not really the bulk of the iceberg, really. But in terms of the key items, which he hits on, like looking at increasing exports from other sectors, how would you do that? Boosting agriculture and manufacturing sectors, because they, surprisingly, after rebasing, contribute a significant portion to GDP. But when you look at the structural and infrastructural inadequacies that prevent you from doing that, that's where the devil in the detail becomes even more important. So how are you going to move past those obstacles and stimulate economic growth from the non-oil sectors? And even at looking at that, trying to hedge yourself in terms of your current exposure to the energy sector, looking at the pace of your reforms and your moves. So looking at the fact that you're trying to grow your non-oil sectors, but at the same time are reliant still on export revenue and government revenue derived from the oil sector. Is it necessarily wise to agitate key actors in the region and risk this further disruption to that key sector when you're trying to move momentum in another regard? So are you putting too much onto your plate at once? It's Africa's largest economy, it's the most populous country, so there's obviously going to be complexities involved around that. It's not all doom and gloom. You see that there have been governance improvements over the past 25 years. You've seen the economic improvements over the past 25 years, so it's not as dire, I think, as international press make it out to be. But there's still some shortcomings that are being overlooked or glossed over rather than being addressed head on. And then it's a question of how do you stage your corrective action? As you're doing too much at once, or at the same time being accused of not doing enough in a responsive, immediately responsive manner. So it's about balancing those needs and clearly laying out a strategy, because I have not seen something that I'm convinced of when looking at it from a perspective of trying to inform foreign investors who are excited about this economy, who are excited about getting involved. How do I get into Nigeria? Everyone's sitting there waiting with bated breath, but is the currency going to devalue? What's going to be the government policy on the power sector? What's going to be the policy in other key sectors is something that creates more anxiety than needed.
Right. It's interesting you say that feeling, everybody wanting to get into Nigeria, but then Nigeria is at this state where nobody seems to know then how is it going to work? What am I going to do? I'm going to have to ask you that, Professor Saludo, because you had your task at one point with your colleagues of turning Nigeria's economy, back up at a time when President Obasanjo came on board. Oil prices were actually low. Something happened then. Can we rework the magic? What would you say to President Buhari, who has an onerous task on his hand? If you sat with him today, what would you be saying to him and his economic team?
Thank you for me. I think I have said too much already.
Update the last thing you said.
Yeah. I'm glad you followed a lot of what I have written, and actually I'm on holiday now. On holiday from writing and speaking. But I had to oblige this because I thought, since it's a panel, there are two persons to do the heavy lifting. And so I can just watch. But more seriously, I want to thank you for the focus on this, trying to fix Nigeria. It's such an omnibus topic. And I think one that is going to take quite a while. I mean, I'm sure you can do that. We had a project in the 90s entitled, Can Africa Claim the 21st Century? I happen to be a co-author of the book. Such an omnibus topic. But on the economy, let me try to frame the discussion maybe as we go on to elaborate by the following in terms of the challenges. Nigeria is characterized by the Funds for Peace as a failed state. It's number 14 out of 100 and something countries. We're the lowest. The number one is the severest, and then we're number 14 for about 3-4 years. But also with a failing economy. So it's characterized as a failed state or a failing state with a challenging economy. That's actually, to summarize, my own take on the state of the economy that we're trying to fix today. Oil has collapsed. Oil price, not just oil price. The primary commodity super cycle is all but over, at least over the next couple of years. So Nigeria should actually be bracing up for what I call the post-primary commodity economy. That's the challenge that we'll face. President Buhari and his team no question, they mean very well. I mean, nobody doubts his sincerity. But like everything else, people say the road to hell is filled with good intentions. I think the fundamental thing today about the Nigerian economy is that the economy is holding up precisely because of the resilience of the ordinary men and women. That Nigerian economy is surviving in spite of government, basically. That's where we are. The challenges are enormous. The government is doing its own bit. But there is a fundamental question, and which is whether the government, at a historic point, falling oil prices and a failing state, can actually self-correct, whether Nigeria can self-correct. Every time, all the episodes in the past, when we had to do something very big, it was with some external undertakers, as it were. Now, the debt relief is there. We don't have that hag, and so there's no conditionalities from anybody. The question is whether we can, on our own, really engineer a path for this post-oil, post-primary commodity-dependent system. And my thesis is that the very first, if you are standing before him, I've written about this, and you read about that for me too. A lecture I gave in November last year entitled, "Can a New Buharinomics Save Nigeria?" And part of my thesis is that actually changing or rescuing Nigeria from the bad ideas can actually be more important than the new ideas that you put in place.
Right.
Make no mistake about it, most leaders all over the world, new presidents and so on and so forth, come into office thinking that their job is to undo whatever has been done. And so they're always in the past, there's a nostalgia of the good old past. In our own case today, seems to be, for me, a mental block. There is still that nostalgia of the past, stuck in the development models of the 1950s and 70s that failed. And we're having a mighty debate as if this is new. We've gone through this road before. All the debate we're going today, what I call infantile nationalism or pseudo-neo-socialism, as it were. We're just going back and forth with crude import substitution strategy that has been tried and failed. So the very first thing I would say to my president is, Mr. President, you mean well, you love the country, but we need a lot of relearning. The way I put it in that lecture that you mentioned is that we have a proverb that you don't learn to use the left hand at old age. But for Nigeria to move forward, Buhari must learn to use his left hand at old age.
I'm going to stop you there.
Okay.
Because I want to ensure that this goes round. And you're hitting on, because I did read that lecture, which I thought was really important. You've hit on something that's really key. There's a lot of talk about what has happened in the past, President Buhari going by what he knows. And Nigerians also buying into, there seems to be particularly a fear of SAP and everything that is perceived to have happened. And that SAP will be the structural adjustment program that was instituted in the 80s, in the time of at that time, General Babangida, when Nigeria was in a similar situation as it is now. And the sense that Nigerians have is emotional, is sentimental. Nigerians did feel that ruined, they feel it ruined the country, and they do not want to be taken back to that time. Even younger people have learned from their parents that SAP and everything else that has to do with liberalization, with a certain kind of fiscal policy, and all of that is bad. It's almost religious. How do you reteach, not just the president, but the entire country, that it's not 1986 anymore, baby? It's 2016 and things have changed. And how do you show them what has changed that might be in their favor? Anybody can take this, but I suspect that Professor Saludo will start.
Well, I think a way to answer you is to say, if you think education is expensive, try ignorance. we are trying a little bit of trying to go back to the past, and we are seeing the consequences as well. So, if people think liberalization was so bad and market economy framework was so bad, so why don't we go back? The truth of the matter is that nothing has changed since 1986. All that subsequent governments have done in Nigeria from 1986 till date, including the era of the Obasanjo regime that you mentioned, including now as we speak, except that we are mixing it up. Nobody has rolled back any of the key principal policy planks of that era. That was the era that laid the foundation for Nigeria's market economy. It was, still is, and nobody has reversed anything except our, patchwork today of trying to say we can go back to an era of a fixed exchange rate regime. And you see what is going on with that. So it's not nomenclature of SAP. What is it about SAP that anybody feels uncomfortable about? Why don't you then reverse it? And even with that, I said to them, exchange rate, don't forget, if you are opposed to it and you want to say it was so bad, so why don't you then move the exchange rate to 1-to-1? Because that's what it was before SAP. And see whether the economy doesn't crumble in a month. In fact, it won't last a month. So, I get that about the sentiment, the emotions, and so on. But that's what I said before. No economy is run on the basis of infantile nationalism or pseudo-socialist populism.
At that point, I'd like to make this point, and Faye, I'd like you to take this, that, however, if you looked at the Nigerian Constitution, it would appear that actually the Nigerian Constitution seems to prescribe a socialist economy.
On page 1.
And our objectives and our aims and our aspirations seems to be a capitalist, or at least a market-based economy. It seems confused. And the result of the confusion isn't that what we are reaping. What does Nigeria really prescribe? Is Nigeria a socialist economy or a capitalist economy by intent, by definition, and practice?
You're right. I mean, on page 1 of the Constitution, it does say the government will run the economy or manage the economy or something like that.
Own everything. It says specifically in Nigeria that the government owns everything, land, water, resources, everything, and shall run and manage everything.
Yeah. I think I don't like the word capitalist. I mean, it was Marx that gave that name to the people he didn't like. It was a slur, if you like. So it wasn't, I prefer market, a market economy. And when you look at what happened with SAP, nobody who is in good health, gets a prescription of SAP. Things were quite bad. I think the numbers, off the top of my head, it was all revenues collapsed from about, I think, $6 billion to $1 billion in 1 year. So pretty similar to what we have now. It was a drastic drop. And, if you're in a bad position, that is when the SAP doctors will come. And the crucial difference between then and now is we had the huge debt. Debt servicing was taking up about 30 or 40% of the budget.
But we have still and growing national debts. We
have local debts now, but at that time it was painful debt. It was foreign debt. So, but we got SAP. A lot of it worked. That's the reality. But you see, the problem is, like somebody said, I think it was a British politician that said something about the problem with reform is that the winners, the people who lose out make more noise than the people who benefit. If you benefit from a policy, you're not going to carry a placard and say, oh, I'm so happy. Thank you, government, for this policy. But if you lose out, and what SAP hit was, it hit the middle class. And they have the loudest voices. It was by all measures, SAP was sort of a reduction. It was a downgrade in lifestyle. You can argue that the lifestyle was elevated based on a false economy of high oil prices and all that. But but farmers benefited, and like you said, we moved to a market economy. All this banking, the banking that we have today, I mean, it's not common. You know, Ethiopia, for example, doesn't have the kind of banking we have in Nigeria, where you have private banking. You know, that the private economy, you know, grew out of that period. You know, but people remember it as, what people tend to remember is, you know, the exchange rate was 1 to 1, and then it went up to, I think, I don't know, maybe 80 Naira to 1 or something, you know. But like, you know, the question then is, you say, you know, people they like all this type of stuff, you know, we're nationalistic and socialism. Fine, is one thing to be that way, but then it's another thing, and I think the bigger problem is that our leaders encourage, you know, all kinds of weird beliefs. You know, they encourage people to believe these things. You know, and President Buhari is not totally innocent of it. During the campaign, he said, maybe it was a slip of tongue, but he said something about, you know, making the Naira strong again. And even since he's come back, he's tied the fortunes of the economy to this fictitious 199 Naira to 1 Naira rate. You know, so people believe this thing, but then you are encouraging them. You know, so it's one thing if people believe I mean, it doesn't have to be that way. But then when the leadership then continues to encourage people to think that a strong currency is the same thing as a strong economy, you know, it's compounding the problem. There's nothing about Nigeria that is inherently, you know, communist or socialist or anything. I mean, people take their pointers from leadership. You know, so I think that's the first thing, that our leadership needs to begin to understand, to try to be honest.
Okay.
You know.
Okay. Can I just say something on that?
Yes.
Because you asked a question about our constitution.
Yes.
You know, I started by talking about the twin challenges: a failed state with a failing economy. And that to fix Nigerian economy, it's not going to be about tinkering about this exchange rate, interest rate, and
Or
this
the
and
devaluation
that,
floating
and so
talk.
on and so forth. These are like, for me, dealing at the micro level, you haven't dealt with the meta level, not even the macro. You see, there are two twin things. First, the Constitution itself is flawed. The Constitution as the edifice was designed for consumption of the oil rent. It was about sharing. The whole apparatus of the Constitution, creation of states, creation of local governments, everybody coming to Abuja to grab something to share. Everybody just talks about my share of the federation and thing, not about production. The fundamental thing is that the music has changed. The dance steps have to change. In the 1980s, it did. And the music, the dance step that had to change was that we had to go over through a structural, a transformation process to now usher a market economy. Today, part of my thesis is that you can't have restore prosperity for Nigeria in a post-commodity cycle regime with the same constitution that is actually designed for consumption. You can't have an efficient, productive system with a constitution that is designed for consumption. That is the first point. The second is, again, talking about this SAP, and so I don't want us to derail into, because otherwise the debate about SAP can become the issue, as it were. But a fundamental point that I have made is that no government, even this one, has not repudiated a market economy framework. That is still what it is promoting. You go all over the world, you're asking foreign investors to come. All the legislations, all the laws, and so on and so forth that have ushered in this market economy framework, none has been repudiated. So we are having that, but the point is that you either have a market economy framework in a consistent manner, consistently so, or if you are putting something different, then let's have it. You can't have a mishmash of, yes, we are market economy investors, you can come into Nigeria, bring your $1 million, and then we go to the bank, we'll give you 198 million. And then across the street, you can get 330 or something million. I mean, I haven't seen one investor who is going to do that. I mean, I'm willing to see that investor. That will be, I mean, and they have a 60% premium. You can't have it both ways. So the fundamental thing is that the system is broken. And the strategy to get it back, for me, for the economy framework, I would put it in the, I mean, if you think about the goal of economic restructuring, should be diversification and export-oriented industrialization. Diversification of the structure of the economy, even away from the primary commodities, to export-oriented industrialization. You see, by 2050, Nigeria's population is projected to be about 440 million people. We have about the highest urbanization rate in the world. Where are they going to get jobs? It's not in agriculture. It's not going to be solid minerals. Export-oriented industrialization. The debates we're having in Nigeria, that's what I call the insular intellectualism. We're so insular, as if Nigeria is so different, or we are so exceptional that the demand curve in Nigeria slopes upwards, and so on. So, no country in the world, and I'm waiting to be shown one, in the last 50 years, has been able to achieve the goals we are setting out for ourselves in terms of export-oriented industrialization and diversification of the economic structure to competitive manufacturing with overvalued, really effective exchange rate regimes.
But it's been argued that that's exactly what the government of today is planning to do. The only difference is that it is planning to use borrowed funds to power the process of manufacturing in Nigeria so that Nigeria can then export. So if investors are not going to come in because of inconsistencies in the monetary policies, then Nigeria herself will power the industries, power enterprise, such that people will be able to produce products in Nigeria, which Nigerians, by sheer size buying, will significantly make a difference. And then we would also export.
Unfortunately, that's a mirage. I mean, and that is, I've never seen such an oxymoron. I mean, it's just an oxymoron, I mean, in terms of thinking and so on.
I want to get Nasnet in. So I want to ask about this foreign investment bit. You know, there's a lot of talk. Everybody that comes into government in Nigeria wants to attract foreign investment. And everybody's spoken this evening and said, you know, if you have inconsistencies in your monetary policy, why would anybody come? You know, it doesn't make sense. You tell us, as a non-Nigerian who talks with foreign investors, how are we going to get foreign investors into Nigeria given the present scenario? Remember, the president said categorically, I will not devalue the Naira.
Even at the behest of some allies.
I'm only reading what's in the papers. I only read the newspapers like everybody else.
Unfortunately, as long as that situation persists, foreign investor confidence is going to be very anxious about going in. Because as the professor has said, if you go in and on one side of the street you can get one rate and then you can nearly triple that, or you could get something much more significant by crossing the street, then what type of foreign investor is going to stomach that uncertainty, despite the opportunities that you might find in such a large market such as Nigeria? So that is just one step. Then looking at the step of what is the regulatory environment like. So looking at the pace of reform and how much legislation has been able to pass through the legislature rather than getting stuck in a black hole like the PIB, that raises red flags as to how there's going to be the regulatory environment that will present a conducive framework for the investment to thrive. Then there are other issues about the operational environment around infrastructure and adequacy. So that might be an opportunity for someone going in, but for others that could be an impediment about how do you commercialize primary commodities? How do you initiate that industrial process if you don't have the surrounding infrastructure to support it, whether it's transport, power, etc.
So what I hear is nobody's coming.
Can I just quickly...
But having said that, you do have Nigerians doing successful business within Nigeria, and then you have the rest of the Africans looking at that as maybe a model to follow about how do you stimulate your own industrial growth. It's not government-led, it's still market-led, but it presents a silver lining there.
Right.
So while foreign investment may be slowed and it will not have the desired impact, you do see that there is a more robust domestic economy that is growing within.
Right. So well,
Let's add something, just the data. Nigeria is Nigeria has a very low savings investment nexus. We are capital starved. But what you've had over the last couple of months, I will even say very last couple of years, 2-3 years, it's a massive hemorrhaging in terms of capital flight. So you have the paradox of a country that is capital starved, capital scarce economy with very low domestic savings and investment that should actually be relying heavily on foreign savings, very heavily. The capital market is down. You can come, you know, the percentage, I mean, of the portfolio investors have left trillions of Naira. That's almost like equivalent of the half or more than half of the federal budget lost in private wealth. That has implications for your economic thing. Talking about manufacturing or the investment and so on and so forth, it is the private enterprise that will power Nigeria to prosperity, not government. Government cannot borrow itself or borrow the Nigerian economy to prosperity. But then, let me give you a piece of information. That since we started this bit, we're giving concessional allocation to some firms and so on and so forth in terms of foreign exchange allocation. What is going on is that capacity utilization in industry continues to go down. We've tried this before with what we call the sectoral allocation of credit. We were giving, on paper, more credit to agriculture, to manufacturing, and those sectors were also going down. What is going on is if you are a manufacturer and you can get $10 million for XYZ to import raw materials and whatever, and you can actually import $1 million worth, and the rest of the other 9 million you can sell by whatever means and get 40, 50, 60% premium. What kind of manufacturing are you going to do to earn a fraction of that rate of return?
Yeah.
So who is the person? Anyway, the tragedy is that we've gone through this road before. This is actually what is frustrating about some of these policy things. We do them as if we are inventing a sea route to India. We've gone through it. 1981 to 85, we did all of this. We are rationing this. Capacity utilization in industry was the lowest ever in our history. The same thing is happening now. The manufacturing sector, the industrial sector, the private sector people who happen to be our priority to receive the so-called cheap dollar, we are losing more jobs in those sectors than we are creating. And that's a fact. No country in the world, the only people who try to imitate, we try to imitate Argentina, but no, by November, the new government dumped it within a week of assumption of office. This doesn't work. Oh, now with Venezuela, we are stuck with Venezuela. That's the new one and so on. And somebody said to me, oh, Malaysia tried the kind of policy during the Asian financial crisis. And Mahathir did it, you know, by having fixed exchange rate, capital controls, and it worked. And I said, oh, really? It worked? I said, but we have had at least 2 other major financial global crises since then. We had 2008, 2009. If Malaysia had discovered the new sea route to, maybe not India this time, to Europe, why didn't they try it again? And why are they not trying it now? So my thesis remains that no country that I mean, I don't know any country in the last 50 years that has gone into diversification of its economic structure, especially into competitive manufacturing. Competitive manufacturing in today's world with heavily overvalued real effective exchange rate or borrow this by this rationing. Even the Communist Party in China knows that it needs a weaker, real, effective currency to outcompete the rest of the world. But here in Nigeria, we're saying, no, we don't have anything to export. We've been making the argument since the 1970s. Indonesia went the other way, and today Indonesia exports more than, I mean, their total manufacturers export is more than 20, 30% of their total exports And Nigeria is still debating the same debate we had in the 1970s.
Okay, I'm going to ask now that let's forget now and imagine that you would be talking to a new generation of Nigerians who genuinely, I suppose that everybody now also genuinely desire that, so I'm not going to say that. I'll take that back. I'll say, imagine you were talking to a future generation of Nigerians. What would you say to them concisely? Because I'm going to throw it to the floor and start taking 2 to 3 years if something doesn't drastically change on one hand. And then on the other hand, if you were talking to a different generation of people, what would you say to them that this is what you must do? And what would be the results? You know, what would you reap if you did that? It's a bit long-winded, but I suppose that you get it. I'll start with you, Nassat.
Very easily is not rely on your oil sector. I mean, it's something that is not new. As the professor said, you're not trying to find a new sea route to India. It's not the holy grail, but it's very obvious, and you find a number of African countries just fail to struggle to move past that point, being so dependent on a raw commodity. But looking at removing that, some countries that have shown themselves to be very successful is when they just dismiss that as part of their economic activity and develop the other sectors in a more concerted manner. So that's the path to follow if you haven't previously, if you're not tied to it, don't have to go through the process of weaning yourself off.
Okay.
In terms of the outlook, it's dim if it continues this way, because as we've all spoken about, you have anxiety within foreign investment about entering the market at this point. You already have significant capital flight. And then you find that agitation on the streets is likely to increase if people continue to feel the brunt of this. It's not specifically a Nigerian issue, but we've seen it in other countries. When it really starts to hurt your day-to-day livelihood, then you find that people become less willing to weather that storm.
Faye?
I think the first thing would be that most countries today who have a floating exchange rate, where the exchange is completely determined by the market, were forced into it. You know, most, including the UK. I mean, there was the Black Wednesday here, and you know, and where they lost the bet, pretty much lost the bet to George Soros, and you know, the pound had to be let go. You know, when you, so what we're having now is the president is saying he's not even going to devalue. You are going to jump one step. When you hit the wall, you're going to jump one step. And it's not even going to be an argument about devaluation anymore. It's going to float. You're going to float the exchange, and it can go 50% one night. It can go 100, depending on how much the market thinks it's overvalued. So this is the danger. You know, you might think, you know, at one point you're going to run out of ammunition, and where, you know, you cannot sustain this anymore. You know, I mean, in a practical sense of the whole foreign investor thing, there's something called the certificate of capital importation. If you want to bring in money into Nigeria now, you know, you need that certificate from the CBN to be able to bring money in, which of course the CBN is going to change for you at 199. Now imagine you have $1 million. Let's just use a round figure. Imagine you want to buy a Nigerian company that is valued at 400 million naira. You know, if you bring it in through CBN, you need $2 million to buy that company. If you bring it in through the black market, you need about $1 million and change to do that. It's a big difference, and you know, it's a cloud hanging, because you are looking at this whole thing that the CBN is, and you're thinking that this policy is not sustainable. So it's going to bring in any kind of big money into Nigeria right now. I mean, sorry, just to use another example, there's the Coca-Cola. If you follow the news, Coca-Cola recently bought, I think it was 40 or 60% into Chivita. Yeah. Now, the negotiations for that deal went on for over a year, because I mean, they first started talking about it in early or late 2014 or early 2015, and I would hazard an educated guess that it was over this whole exchange rate business. Eventually, they did it, but then the price they initially mooted was about $1 billion. And then by the time they finished the deal, they ended up around, I don't know, $600 million or something. You could tell that they could probably have taken into account that, you know what, this devaluation can happen anytime. So what we'll do is we'll bring down the valuation and we'll come in. But how many people, I mean, how long are you going to, if it's taking 1 year to do a deal, you know? So this is what is happening. There's a cloud hanging, and nobody's, and we're just, you know, everyone is just waiting there, okay, your move. And the president keeps saying he's not going to murder the Naira. It's going to be buried. You know, I mean, if you continue like this, it's going to be buried in third, you know, on 6 feet under, and then it will be completely out of your hand. But then again, the silver lining is this: the UK was forced into a market exchange rate Has the country gone backwards since then? I don't think so. It's a better country today. Economically, nobody's going to say, the UK is worse off than before when the exchange rate was.
So in short, for you, it's either pray for the price to go up.
Pray for oil to go up.
Which doesn't seem like it's going to happen in the next 5 years or thereabouts, or the house is going to have to fall down, and then we're going to have to pick ourselves up.
Yep.
That's what you're saying.
That's it. If we get oil at $60, maybe we'll still have to make an adjustment, but the adjustment might not be so painful. But if it continues this whole 40 today, 30 tomorrow, and it continues for another 1 year, it's a crash.
Right.
You're going to run into a wall.
All right. I'll come back to that issue of, so what would you say to, maybe another generation that, look, guys, this is what you need to be doing. This is what you need, because there are young people. Some of you guys would end up in government eventually. And I don't want to be sitting down having this conversation about something that was done 30 years ago. So oftentimes I find in talking with younger Nigerians in particular, they're not quite clear what the issues are. Sometimes when you talk about, okay, SAP actually brought the beginning of the market economy that we do have now. This is what market economy would be. They have never lived in a country of full market economy. So they truly, genuinely do not understand it.
But they all line up at the embassy to go to market economies.
They don't, but they haven't lived in it.
But they want to go there.
It's a big difference. So they don't know, and they don't really understand that other point you were making earlier, Professor, about the Constitution, the discrepancies, what needs to change. Because I know once I read you speak about restructuring, and actually negotiating, because we're talking now about the president. The president does not the country make on his own. Well, I don't think so.
I
so
agree.
what about all the other parts of government and what their roles should be? Because that informs, when you go to polls, who you are electing. I know you know about this because you did try to run for governor. The people in your state prefer the man who likes to build 60 million, like how many Christmas tree? That's like a skyscrapering Christmas tree. All right, so, Prof, come back to me again and take it from there. That what's going to happen in the immediate future if we continue like this?
I think
what should we be doing?
For me, let's not. It's I don't know. It's a nightmare scenario that you've painted, and my own response to it will be, God forbid. I never ever wish even to think that this could go on much longer or for an extended period of time. I don't know what gives me the confidence to believe that the team there, I don't know, like I said, it's not unusual. A lot of presidents, newly elected presidents, especially in the developing world, they come in thinking they're going to go back to the good old days. And over time, they learn. I'm only praying that the president and so on would quickly come to the reality, whether he learns it or the reality forces him to it. Because delayed adjustment can be extremely dangerous. As he pointed out, the realities will be such that by the time we get there, the collateral damage to the system will be so much that picking the pieces, you may need maybe a generation or so to go back to it. With the unemployment rising, the inflation rate has already adjusted to the parallel market rate, even when you are fixing it. So you are afraid of death, but you are committing suicide in the interim. You are afraid of inflation as a result of, quote, devaluation, but already inflation is upon you, adjusted already. But even much worse, my thesis is that the adjustment to the parallel market rate is even much worse because of the uncertainty. So inflationary expectations are much, much, much higher because of the uncertainties in the forex market. Then, in fact, you are having what I might call overshooting of the parallel market rate in anticipation of what they think might happen. I think the whole policy conundrum, in my view, will require, I think at some point, and I pray sooner than later, the economic team, the government, the president, and so on, will come to terms with this fact. As I often say to them, if you say to me, oh, you won't devalue. I hate to discuss this in terms of devalue or not devalue, because for me, it's a nonsensical concept. It's not about devaluation. It's about having an appropriate exchange rate regime that ensures that you have effective, real, undervalued exchange rate regime. That's what we have been able to do it. We actually did it when I was in office and when the oil prices were actually inching up, which was more difficult to do. We've done it before.
I have a quick question to ask
Yeah.
you. Just at that point, when you were in office, you spoke many times. I've read a lot of the things that you've had to write in the past about restructuring, about actually realigning the constitution to match the aspiration of a market economy for Nigeria. Why wasn't that done then?
Okay.
Did you not speak to Mr. President at
Not
that time?
even speaking. In fact, if you see one of my write-ups, I had a series, part 1, part 2, part 3, entitled Restructuring Nigeria for Prosperity. And if you see, it started September 3, 2012, the 3 series. And I started, the opening sentence there was to refer to the Democracy Day lecture that I gave in 2005 with President Obasanjo sitting as the chair. And I gave it, it was broadcast live nationwide. Major thesis there was that we go nowhere. I mean, we have this hodgepodge of institutions and so on designed to consume the lottery from oil. And that if we wanted to develop a competitive system, you can't go on the way. And it is now evident. Most of the so-called states that we created and so on are unviable, so to speak. Everybody now knows it. Much of the oil revenue was used to consume, I mean, for consumption. 70, 80%. We were actually borrowing for recurrent expenditure at the peak of the oil boom. So you can't continue with this system. Now the governors are also asking again, bail us out again, give us more money. It's about giving money. The party is over. And we need an entirely new system. Don't forget, every president has done a constitutional conference or national conference of sort. It happened under Obasanjo too. Unfortunately, the third term issue led to throwing away the entire proposed amendments. So it never happened. Jonathan came. He also has just had, he also had a national conference, 2014. The report is still there with proposals, in my view, doesn't go too far, but it's a good beginning. But the truth is that the current system as currently structured is a road to nowhere. We can talk about put infrastructure, provide this. How are you going to provide infrastructure when most states are struggling to pay salaries with the exchange rate regime that you have today and so on and so forth? So anyway, my point, I mean, coming back to the next generation, I will say to them, I read there's a book I was just reading recently, said Economics Does Not Lie. That's the title of the book. Simple, basic things that we know. Take them. And then, of course, there's a lot of innovation. The global economy is in constant state of flux. Innovation, adaptation, re-engineering must continue to be. You can't run yesterday's race. You can't run today's or tomorrow's race with yesterday's tracksuit, as it were. So innovation, continuous innovation must be the way. But for goodness sake, my lesson, fundamental thing I'll say to them is, don't try to reinvent the wheel. The one that is not broken, don't mend it. But you will continue to learn a new thing, because it won't always be that you go back to that of yesterday in order to tackle the one of tomorrow. But trying to reinvent the wheel can be catastrophic.
Right. I'm going to now come to the audience as well, the audience right in the hall and the ones in Nigeria, where the topic how to fix Nigeria is actually trending now on all social media. People want to get in. They want to dig in. So I'm going to give them the opportunity to do so. How to fix Nigeria, just hashtag how to fix Nigeria, Royal African Society, or you can also do, it's a long one, joining the stream, and that would be just Google Frontline Club. The rest of it, you'll find it under events, and you'll find it being live streamed right now. If you are listening or watching on whatever platform it is that you are we'll do it right now. You wrote an article that was very interesting where you wrote, I know my people. You were talking about culture. You know, there was another one I wrote which was very interesting by another very bright young lady, Eloho, who talked about, you know, the special snowflakes. That Nigerians, there are no special snowflakes. There seems to be a conversation, roundtable conversation going on all the time in Nigeria about the symptoms, how Nigerians are. A lot of it seems to be about the symptoms. The culture Nigerians have seems to be a culture that has developed out of the structural issues that we have refused to address, that we seem to be unable to address. Prof, I'm still going to come back to you because I want to understand, beyond the conferences that were held, those such as yourself, clearly knowledgeable, clearly informed, clearly bright, how was it that you couldn't persuade the government at that time to go beyond those conferences, to actually begin to make those structural changes?
You have to pass it into law. That's
this is where I'm coming to. So now it's not about
and
the executive.
They all put it to the National Assembly.
Right.
President Obasanjo did. He went to the National Assembly. The result of that went to National Assembly. The only thing is that one clause, which was the about third term clause, they used it to kill the entire thing.
Right.
So Jonathan has also led his own to the National Assembly. And that's why there is a debate now going on in Nigeria. People want the current president to bring that report back, because we need to sit back. The house is broken.
Right. Because that was my intention. I wanted us to now also focus on the other arms of government and what their roles should be in all of this. But I'm going to, because there are many, many people in the audience who have questions. And I'm going to start taking the questions from now. The first hand that went up, that was yours. So I've got to take that first hand. I'm looking for the microphone. Yes, it's coming. And you can ask a question of anybody on the panel. She's almost here. She's almost here.
Hi.
If you tell us who you are.
Yeah, my name's Sita Shut, and I'm from Charity for Prosper World. We're currently working on a project with the Nigerian fashion industry. And so one of my questions was actually not related to the fashion industry, but to Nollywood and to these other areas that seem to be sort of booming and thriving, that are an exportable sort of industry. And what would any of you like to comment on that?
Interesting, yeah. So concerning Nollywood or fashion, you know, the creative arts industries that seem to be blooming in Nigeria, blossoming in Nigeria, but they are not exportable. You know, so what would you comment about, you know, what would be the role of the creative arts industries be in Nigeria's development prosperity equation?
It's a good thing. I mean, there's a statistics I saw recently. Basically, you know, in any economy, you know, people move away from the farm and then move somewhere. So, I mean, for example, in Southeast Asia, people were planting carrots and stuff like that, and the attention to detail that those kind of crops required of them, by the time manufacturing came, those skills were transferable. You know, so you always have people moving away from agriculture into, you know, manufacture ideally. Now, here's what the numbers are. If you move from agriculture to services, productivity doubles. Your productivity will double. If you move from agriculture to manufacturing, it's 6 times, 600%. You know, so if you take a farm worker, you know, and you move him into manufacturing, he will produce 6 times what he was doing on the farm. If you move him to services, he'll produce 2 times what he was producing. Now, in sub-Saharan Africa, Nigeria inclusive, 80% of people who are moving out of the farm are moving into services. So they're moving into hotels, you know, Nollywood, that sort of thing. You know, we don't have a problem with, you know, so to answer your question, we don't have an undersupply of people in services. You know, we have I mean, Nollywood is there, employs loads of people. What we need is actually manufacturing, you know, those skills. There are skills that come with it. When you make something, you know, there are some it's hard to.
Well, isn't fashion manufacturing? I mean, making loads and loads of clothes and shoes.
Yeah, I mean, well, yeah.
All of that.
So where do the textiles come from? Are they locally produced? Or those are all, if the feeder inputs are all imported?
The mass side. So, for example, in Nigeria today, if you say you want 1 million t-shirt size 10. You can't get it.
Okay, so the point really at the end of the day is like all the other industry, creative and arts industry is just like any other form of industry and manufacturing, and the issues are the same. What I want to do is I want to take a number of questions and then we'll take them in a set. So I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, 4. So it's answer 1, 2, 3, 4. And then I'll take the next set. The gentleman right here. Thank you. And
my name is Chandaria. I've been working in Nigeria for 40 years now. All I'd like to raise is for the young people, there's a lot more opportunity because Nigeria is entrepreneurial. And what India did some years back is when the infrastructure was not good enough, they got people into the IT. Now, the problem is how do we make sure that people have the funds available for the thoughts they have of doing something in IT, because I see a lot of Nigerians with a lot of entrepreneurship.
thank you. That's Chibundu, isn't it? Yes.
Hello, thank you for your talk. My name is Chibundu Onuzo. I'm a writer. My question is actually for Professor Saludo. On this panel, you said that Nigeria has not changed since 1986. That is an indictment on a political class. The economy, like the structure of the economy. Once you said it, I noted it because I feel that that indictment includes yourself because you were part of that political class. And you've talked about, and I think the chair has mentioned this, but you know, you've talked about how you wrote articles and you had all these, in your government, there were many brilliant ideas, but at the end of the day, it seems like the forces against change are too strong because you're sitting down here and you tried and it didn't seem to work. So what's way forward?
Yes.
I think you should go what he said wrong, yeah.
Good evening. My name is Omamo Benite. I run a small company that makes African ready meals. We sell them in supermarkets. And I'm one of those, well,
Ready meals.
would be, yes.
Yeah.
This company is called Varo. I'm one of those would-be investors that is sitting and watching. I get asked by a lot of people why I do not manufacture my products in Nigeria. And most of the time I tell them, well, if you can point me to a contract manufacturer, I'll do it there. That would be really helpful. At the same time, it's also a huge market because you're making African food, but you do not sell to Nigeria or in Nigeria. I've been watching and I've been waiting and I've been looking for signs. When do we know? Because you all seem very bullish about the long term, in a sense, in a sort of, God forbid, as you said, that it gets worse and worse and totally breaks down. But what should someone be looking at? We're looking at the economic team, not much confidence there. We're looking at the Forex thing, not much confidence there. They don't seem to know what side should we look for to see things are beginning to turn a corner?
Right. There was a gentleman, there was someone at the end there. So that's the last, that's the 4 for this group. Yes, right at the back on the, yeah.
Good evening. Listening to everybody speaking, one thing I feel that was not mentioned is corruption and the forces of Islam destabilizing Northern and Western Africa and maybe perhaps even Southern Africa. What's your view on that?
Okay, so that's 4 questions. You can, who wants to start?
Can I defend you? I think just to clarify what he said was basically he says Nigeria started a journey since 1986 towards a market economy. That has not been reversed so far. You know, that's the direction we've been moving. And if Buhari doesn't like it, like he said, change it. You know, but nothing has changed. We have private banking, we have private enterprise. We actually move closer to a market-determined exchange rate. But if you don't like it, you should put it to 1-to-1 if you think that is the problem. So I think that's what he meant by we've moved in one direction towards the market economy since 1986. We haven't changed. But right now, we're just sitting down saying, you don't like this, you're throwing a tantrum. If you don't like it, okay, take us back to full-blooded socialism and let's see how it goes.
Yeah.
I think that's...
But I couldn't have done it better.
Right, there was a question of what should we be, because I think maybe you should take that, you know, that if all the God forbid scenario and all of that, but well, just in case of, if we're looking for something, you know, a point as to this is the time to get back in there, what will that sign be? Was that not your question?
Pretty much.
Yes. When would it be the time to know yes.
Beginning to turn the corner?
Yes. What will be the first signs to tell us that day is breaking?
I suppose clarity on the monetary policy is the clearest sign as to which direction the economy will be going in. Lack of action up until that point, as everyone has pointed out, will only breed more problems rather than solutions. In terms of looking at what financing the government is able to secure, so undisclosed amount from China, everyone's favorite lender in Africa, looking at what was received from that and how it's going to be deployed. So what infrastructure projects will that be targeted towards? And is that going to present a conducive environment that you can grow those small manufacturing capacity that you would need in order to bring a business such as yours into the country? It's that part of the value chain. It's part of what Faye was just saying. It's like, yes, there's a fashion industry, but how much of the value chain is actually in Nigeria? Is it just imported textiles and then someone sews it, so limited productivity within the country, and then it's exported? Or is it, you know, looking at what some other countries in Africa are doing, which is to build that whole value chain behind it before they look at that last part of the process, the services, and looking at having more robust, entrenched economic activity in the country as a result?
There's one particular sign you should look out for. So recently there's been talk, right? They said they want to do a sort of second exchange rate. So basically what they are saying is that this 199, you take it out of our cold dead hands. You know, we're going to keep this our rate. But then there was some talk about, some people wanted to circle around the government and say, okay, you know, let's have another rate whereby is I don't know, it could be two, whatever, market determined, but it will be among the banks. In that way, you know, so you have that rate whereby investors can come in. Now, it was floated. It actually made it into last week's Economist magazine. You know, it was in there. People are briefing about it. I don't know what scuppered it. It was supposed to have been announced by now. When you see that, they are saying, okay, we have one special rate for manufacturers, 199. You know, but then we now have another market rate that's determined by, say, okay, it's messy. It's not, and it will be corrupt. You know, there will be, even with the church mind, you know, it will be very, very difficult for you to resist temptation of saying, taking from 200 and then jumping to 300, you know, without doing anything. But when you see that, you know that they're giving up. You know that they've actually realized that, you know what, this mess, you know, it is a face-saving thing. So Mr. President gets to keep his 199 rate, which he loves so much, but then the economy can go on. You know, keep your rates. But let's get this, you know, I mean, one of my favorite quotes is Adam Smith. He says, there's a great deal of ruin in a nation, you know. What he meant was that basically politicians can try to destroy an economy, but it takes a lot, you know. And I mean, the Nigerian economy, it can be down, but it's going to take a lot to completely destroy it.
Okay, I've got to move on. Professor Saludo, do you want to take some of those questions? Because I'm going to take the next set of questions, and I have some from Twitter, I think this have come from. Go on. Did you want to take any of those questions? Are you fine?
Let me,
a lot of the questions circle around the same issues, really. You know, people wanted to know, you know, we've tackled the foreign exchange rate, but there's an interesting question here about, should Nigeria go back to regional government? Is that what you mean when you say that, you know, it's a consumption economy, we want to move on to a productive economy? All the different governments have had talk about it. There have been bills passed, you know, and so is that what you mean? That's what they're asking here in a nutshell. And also, I had two questions from Twitter, specifically from Andrew Ali, who used to head the AFC in Nigeria, and you will know the AFC quite well, and Tunji Andrews, who also runs an economic program, the biggest online one in Nigeria, talking specifically about Land Use Act, about change, those structural issues which you're talking about. You know, if we don't do something about those, where are we really going to go? Yeah,
thank you very much. I think there was a question about Nollywood and fashion. That's a very interesting one. Well, on the fashion one, you've got the lady of fashion, in my house. I don't know much about that, but my daughter, who is sitting just at the end here, is a fashion guru, as it were. I think you might, because she was talking about something about the fashion network in Africa, Lagos, Nairobi, Joburg, and all of those, and what that means, that market, and how to exploit and export that. But on Nollywood, I would also say that it's exportable. We watch Nollywood here, don't we? All over Africa, as the case may be. It's really a very fast-growing service industry. And I must also say that has helped to market and showcase Nigeria, our culture, as the case may be. I go to many parts of Africa, and once you say you're from Nigeria, somebody says, Igwe. So that's part of the... okay. Now, on the corruption bit, I think we must give the president credit here and his team. The signal, the signal is right, and they must be encouraged to continue that way, to signal that impunity cannot be tolerated, because we were getting almost to a stage where we became numb to this matter. So it is important to keep reminding people this can't be, and I hope they will do that in a much more systematic manner. So it's certainly a very big one. They're also fighting terrorism. Everything we read now is that Boko Haram is severely degraded and so on. But still some way to go, and we hope sooner than later. So we'll also commend him in that regard. Regional governments, I would say that's actually part of the thesis that some of us make. If you look at our 1963 Republican Constitution and look at the revenue allocation formula there, each region had their own revenue. You pay tax to the federal government. So there, you won't count more than 2, 3 states, so-called states. We reverse it, where in a federation is the federating units that come together to make a federation. Ours is a queer one, where the federal government sat and started creating the federating units. Everybody with an entitlement to come down to the center every month to collect revenues to spend. It was also the central government in a federation that created all the local governments, with all of them with powers to come to Abuja at the end of each month to collect money. Now, so why on earth would a regional or state government want to make investments to grow productive assets? If you attract manufacturing in your state, the corporate tax that's to be paid will be paid to Abuja, and everybody else comes and shares. Where is incentive? Competitive federalism and federating units that are also fiscally viable. Fiscally viable. I talk about the mineral rights. Keep your thing, whatever, and pay tax to the federal government, as the case may be, until we get that. That's what worked in the First Republic. The Western region, the University of Ife, and so on and so forth, the Cocoa House. Cocoa was what built Western region. In the East, it was palm that built the cities in the East. In the North, it was the granite pyramids and so on. Now we've come to a point where we've broken the umbilical cord between government and business, and we want business to... The umbilical cord is that government depends on business to pay taxes and to create jobs. In return, government wants to do everything in its power for business to prosper. But oil rent broke that umbilical cord. You don't need it. You just go to Abuja and collect money. So you don't need any company.
I've got 5 more minutes to go. So I've got to actually, and this is a good point to ask this last question. And this question is also from Twitter. Somebody called Onuzo. And Onuzo is asking, actually really leading off from what you're saying now, that if oil prices go back to $70 and above a barrel, will we forget buy Niger to grow Niger and go back to our old ways? In essence, I would I would go further to say, isn't our present situation a blessing in
It is a
disguise?
blessing.
Such that some of the points you are making now, that's what the entire country needs to understand, that this is what we must push for now if we are really to head towards a market economy. And it's really a market economy that can grow Nigeria to prosperity. That's what the point is making.
Yeah.
Is it a blessing in disguise?
I called it an opportunity, a historic opportunity, which we must never miss. Because the current policy framework I see is that we're glued to short-term crisis demand management, but praying hard for oil price to go back so that we go back to business as usual. That seems to me to be what I say. You know, if we can tinker here, clobber some people, clobber things here and there, and then hoping that oil can go back so we can return. Because we're waiting for that fundamental thing that says we have to turn the corner. So if oil price were to go back to 70s, 80s, and whatever, I can almost take any bet, that nothing fundamental would happen. And this historic opportunity is one that we need to seize. Seize it with both hands. But how this can happen in a democracy with short-term electoral cycle on the part of the politicians who are looking for into the next election, and we're asking them to take very tough decisions that might impact their electoral fortune. That is where the challenge lies. How could politicians with short-term electoral cycle, looking at the next election in the next 2 years plus, and eager not to displease anybody, be able to look people in the eyes and say, hey, the party is over. We can't continue this way, and so on and so forth. That actually is the fundamental challenge that we'll face. And that's why I asked the question at the beginning, can Nigeria self-correct? Every time we've done it, either under SAP, when we've done fundamental changes, or even under the President Obasanjo when we were asking for debt relief, there was an external anchor that looked over your shoulders, as it were. Now that we have debt relief, so we have big policy space, we can decide and say, no, we'll have to fix the Naira, whatever it is. But by the way, let me say about, because there was a point he made, which is interesting, on foreign exchange. In theory, in economic theory and empirical evidence, it is theory and evidence that has actually compelled most countries of the world to go with a more flexible exchange rate regime. In economic theory, a country that is facing a terms of trade shock, the type that we are facing, the adjustment, you must allow relative prices to adjust. And those with more flexible relative prices have always adjusted far better than the ones that didn't allow prices to change. That is theory. And the evidence all over the world has borne that out. Indeed, the calculation is that those that are with fixed prices underperform by more than almost a double. So if the GDP is growing at about 2%, it probably should have grown at 4%. So the current policy is costing us at least 2 to 3% of GDP on an annualized basis. So it is theory, it is evidence, and that fact we must take home. So if it goes back to $70, there's a song by one of our musicians, just enjoying people. Let's enjoy today. After today, we worry about what is going to happen tomorrow. So I'm sure if it does, people are going to say, finally God has heard our prayers. So let's go back to the good old days, as it were. And I would rather say again, I believe God loves Nigeria. He should keep the oil price as low as possible.
All right, I've got to round up completely now. I must thank you. Faye, I'm going to give you a last, both of you, Faye and Nasda, to say, you know what I mean, what would be your own concluding statements on this issue? What would you like to see?
I would like to see a reckoning with reality, you know, a honest debates. You know, I mean, if the debate has always started from Mr. President saying, you know, I need to be convinced. That's not a debate. That's a rigged. You know, I mean, his mind is already made up. You know, but I want to see a reckoning with reality. Look Nigerians in the face and say, you know what, this is where we were. You know, $110 a barrel. You know, we didn't save anything. We were borrowing to pay salaries. You know, recurrent expenditure went up from 800 billion to 1.8 trillion over 4 years, more than doubled. We spent the money. There is no money. You know, now it is $40. You know, the hand of shale oil is looking at us from America and saying, you know, get to $60 and we're back. You know, I mean, it's a whip hand the Americans now have. You know, if the oil gets to a certain place, they're back. All the rigs in America, in Texas. The oil under Texas is 6 times what is in Saudi Arabia.
So that money,
you know, so we are caught in between this tight space, and so what needs to happen is no more than facing reality and say, you know what, this is where we were, this is where we are now, and with the way things are looking, you know, if we get to $50, we're lucky. So let's start adjusting.
Let's start praying that the prices stay low. That's what you're saying too.
I'm not so optimistic about that. I mean, I'm not. Look, we've had prices low for it's coming to 2 years now. What have we done? 1 whole year just fooling around, you know, throwing a tantrum. Mr. President was saying recently that oil prices are not acceptable. You know, what do you want to do about it? You know? So I mean, that's what so I'm not so optimistic that, you know. So that's what I said. Look, I want, you know, $50, $60, that, you know, whereby at least we're making a profit from our oil cost. The most expensive one, I think, costs about $30-something.
Okay, I hear you. So pray that the prices stay low. Don't pray that the prices stay low. What shall we do? Not pray.
No, I think it's just building off of what the other two panelists have said. It's looking at this as an opportunity to finally diversify the economy and build an industrial base. And that will be the engine for the next wave of economic growth within the country. And the role that the country plays within the immediate region and then the continent shouldn't be underestimated. So looking at that as becoming the powerhouse for a lot of economic activity across Africa. I would think
that's a good point that we didn't really go into, economic integration across Africa.
Exactly.
But then also it's the same bedrock, isn't it?
It is. As the professor said, you go to anywhere in Africa, someone knows a Nollywood line. If you're looking at how quickly Nigerian firms are moving across and investing in other parts of Africa, it's starting to show that there is a prospect for intra-regional trade. You can only trade what you produce, so let's look at producing more within Nigeria. So you're not only weaning yourself off of your oil dependence, but weaning yourself off of specifically delivering to certain markets and starting to deliver to the markets surrounding you. That starts to unlock potential for further steps of economic growth and some of the innovation that the professor was talking about.
All right. Thank you very much. Professor, thank you. Faye, thank you. Nasser, thank you. Everybody who's been here today participated. I know that we couldn't take as many questions as you would have wanted. Perhaps we'll consider a longer time. We are Nigerians. We do tend to talk a bit about our issues. We're hoping that we will do more as we go on. Thank you very much. It's the How to Fix Nigeria series. It's ongoing. The next topic will be about dismantling patriarchy in Nigeria. Everybody laughs.
If I can please jump in, first off, on behalf of the Frontline Club, thank you to our speakers this evening. And if anybody would like to continue the discussion, we are opening our members' room on the floor below. So please do feel free to move downstairs and have a drink and speak further. And thank you, everyone, for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.